Welcome to UX Research Geeks, where we geek out with researchers from all around the world on topics they are passionate about. I'm your host, Tina, a researcher and a strategist, and this podcast is brought to you by UX Tweak, an all-in-one UX research tool. This is usually the place where you hear me to read out the introduction that my beautiful producer, Jana, always prepares for me. But as this conversation is so juicy, I just want to point out that I met Pamela here in Vienna at the UX Vienna meetup, and she started to speak. She just basically made the room shine. And I feel like the whole discussion that we had is also very juicy, very much with light, and with not such easy topics as financial psychology is. She's definitely a researcher, a very thoughtful one, with a lot of insight in finance, a lot of insight in Latin American markets. So this episode is about these topics, and I think it's true to our name, UX are Geeks, because we are geeking out big time, comparing European market with the Mexican one and then the national markets in Latin America. We are also talking about some stereotypes with a lot of humor, so I hope you will understand it. And we were just simply having fun while geeking out. I hope you will too. One of my first questions, how do other countries react to Mexico? Because I have my reactions. I dated a Mexican guy and he was making fun even of himself, that you put just a sombrero on him and he's a very typical Mexican, like in his whole characteristic and extroversy and smiling and laughing all the time. But I think there are a lot of stereotypes which are like not true.
A lot of people think that Mexicans are slow and not really like hardworking, like we're not really productive. So I would say that this might not be true because I've worked with people from different places in the world. And I think that every country has their way of working. I feel like people from India are so hardworking. People from the States might have this constant communication and things like that. So when people come to Mexico, they feel like we take our time, we're a little bit more relaxed and things like that. But it's not that. It's sometimes that our infrastructure or the things we do because we work with people at the end might not come as easy or as efficient and in other countries. Like I would give you an example of a couple of projects I've had where the recruitment, for example, as standardized, we take about 2 weeks to get a recruitment, right? And when other countries were bringing in a lot of their recruitees or people that they were going to interview, let's say in the first week, our recruitment will be, let's say, finished by 2 days or 3 days before the actual interviews. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people in Mexico tend to push things for later, always trying to be like, so can you confirm with me the dates and things like that. But people just love to have their options open. That's how I feel it. And so that they don't cancel to you at the last minute because they have something else. So people tend to be like open in their opportunities and just be like, okay, now I know I don't have anything to do. Now I can confirm with you. Or either my priorities, like I already done a couple of things that are my priorities. Now I can confirm with you. I think it's a matter of people in Mexico, this, as you were saying, like this laughter, this trying to be so nice. It's something that we have in our DNA, to be honest. And it also translates to the research part, because in Mexico, I don't know if you have this in Europe, but it's really hard for people to tell you, oh no, I don't like this about your design. Or no, this doesn't work for me.
It depends. In Europe. I think Europeans overall are more direct, but there are huge differences. Western Europe, South Europe, Eastern Europe, where I come from. On the other hand, and that's where when I lived in Berlin and I was working with, I don't know how many nationalities, you kind of have to read in between the lines, although you are not trying to, but pick up like the soft vibration, I would say. Yeah. And that was happening for me with the Brazilian colleagues who are very polite, but I could see something is happening and they might not like it. So I was like digging in. And I know that I am doing it now on a research project with a British client where they say, oh, it's fine. And I'm like, oh, wait a second, what means fine from 1 to 10? And it's a
Yeah.
6 or a 7. So I know, oh, okay, there's something happening. So I need
Yeah.
some time for clarification. How are you dealing with this? I mean, you are Mexican, so you can probably read it better, but how do you then translate it?
To be honest, it takes talent, I have to say, in terms of being understanding, or let's say being able to navigate the context, the cultural context of research. I feel like it's really hard whenever you're not in contact with the context of the research. That's why it's a good practice to always have someone from the country being the one moderating interviews and research and things like that. People in Mexico have a harder time getting money. The infrastructure, like medical infrastructure, is not as good. So sometimes they will have to go to private doctors. So they're always thinking about this survival mode where, what if this happens? Or what if I have something that can go wrong and I need to spend more money? In good times, they will be willing to spend in entertainment and things like that. But in hard times, they're really conscious about what are the things we really need. No user will tell you this. No user is aware of what they're doing. And no user will be, oh, yes, of course, it's because sometimes I do this and sometimes I do that. So in order to understand the reason why, it's like where the context of the interview comes in. It's like, where are you living? Like a little bit of like demographics, as well as like, how do you behave with your money and how do you behave with your family? And are you the owner of your own time and your own money, or do you have to give it to someone else? So I think having a context of the culture and being close to the people of the culture gives you a great grasp of why things are a certain way. But coming in from other markets and having these important questions for the product, I feel like it gives the research a depth that sometimes, as Mexicans, let's say, we just give it as it's just a given. Yes, of course. But really bringing in those perspectives, I think makes the research a lot more rich, a lot more like with meat. We would say in Mexican, like with meat, it makes it so juicy and so interesting that at the end, you're not only understanding a product by itself, you're actually understanding the concept and the ecosystem in which the project or the product actually gets related.
It's a very strong insight because I also come from a country. Okay, now it's like getting, and it was called the economic tiger in the beginning of 2000s. But we are still an Eastern European country. And I remember stories like my friends are coming over when I was a kid, maybe 5, 6 years old. So it was after the wall fell and communistic time was over. But still, I gave my friends a banana and my mom was not angry, but she was irritated because she was like, those were bananas for you and I bought them. So it was like this experience of we weren't poor, not in the context of Slovakia, but we had to watch our money.
Yes.
And it's also very important to point out at this point for me how important it is to have a cultural translator who knows the economic situation, who knows the political situation, and what is behind those decisions that people make, although they are not saying it directly.
Yes.
In Germany, maybe people would say as they are direct, I don't have the money because this and this. In Mexico or countries in Latin America or even in Eastern Europe, people won't say that directly. And it's also, when it comes to finance, very much connected to shame.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Money is so psychological at the end.
Yeah. How would you say are Mexicans around money? I love researching in finance. That's one of my favorites.
Oh,
So
I know. Fintech is the sexiest industry, I feel.
yeah, for me too.
I know, right? I think it's tied so much to psychology and how we perceive money, because at the end, money talks about abundance, and abundance also talks about how you translate your own abundance and your own self. So it's really interesting. I feel that's what it makes it so sexy. I would say that in Mexico, we are really cost conscious, but at the same time, I would feel, because we are a huge, like most demographics in Mexico, like the most important part is middle class. But at the same time, in Mexico, we are so polarized because we have the 1%, it's so rich, so rich that they just like they spend money like whatever they want. But at the same time, we have these rich people, we also have the complete opposite, where we have also these people that are so poor that stop like you stop dividing the social economical levels and you bring in another side of it, which is marginalized levels, which is something completely different. And in Mexico, we also have these social economical levels. Let's say the 1% is just like AB, then we have this, but AB is like the highest one. And then we have the middle class. And the middle class is actually divided into three, whether like this middle class is a C level, you have C plus, C, and C minus, because this is the biggest group, let's say. But from it, we also have, let's say, the D and the F. And then after the F, the government also has a level of marginalization, where it's just like, how marginalizes that town or how marginalizes that person? And it's such a vast region, it's so big that there are people living in marginalized areas where they don't have electricity, they might not have fresh water, and they would actually have to walk for about 2 to 3, maybe 5 kilometers in order for them to get fresh water in a bucket and then bring it back to the community. So things like this make it hard for people to really understand the whole perspective of Mexico. But in terms of like economics, I would say that we're really polarized. However, most products and most services are based on the middle class. And the middle class has this perspective of aspiration that they want the social economical mobility. Is like, okay, let's spend a little bit more money in what brings us a little bit more status. How can we be portrayed as a little bit more than what we are? Or how can we actually feel like we live above these standards? So I feel like the middle class in Mexico is really aspirational. And then the poor class, of course, it's so hard for them to get a buck. I was reading a statistic about how only 20% of the whole market earns a little bit more than to 20,000 pesos a month, which is about 1,000 euros, per month. So you can tell now how people and the perspective and the psychology behind it is, okay, let me make the most out of this money. And I feel like people in Mexico are so strategic in ways of like how to stretch a dollar, how to stretch like 100 pesos in being able to work for them in so many ways. And I don't want to say that everybody in Mexico is counting pesos, but they are really strategic in terms of, at least our middle class is really strategic in ways of, okay, how am I going to put my money? And of course, it depends of like their interests, their needs, and their values. I won't say that everybody is super interested in health and they will actually put apart some money for these things, but it would have to do with their basic necessities. I feel like a lot of them are just based on, okay, how much is it to maintain, to fulfill the needs of my family right now? And then everything else will come later. Everything else would be secondary in priority.
When I was in Germany and I started to work for Commerzbank, we started to look into financial psychology. And that is a concept developed by a Mr. named Klotz. And I think it's not perfect, but it gives you a good inspiration for how to typologize people. Although, yeah, it's stereotyping people also. And it's pretty negative typology because it points out just the bad behavior with the money I have, kind of feeling of it. But when I was also presenting it to people, it was perceived like that. And I figured out that on a national level, you can also put nations into this typology. For example, Germans were more in the spectrum of diligence, where they were keeping the money, where they were also pretty strategic on where to put it, especially the older generations, because they were still told stories about the First World War, about the hyperinflation, where there are like photos of children playing with bills of money, or that a bread cost million Deutsche Mark. And the Second World War, Germany was so destroyed that people were really struggling to go from day to day. Older generation in Germany, they still have a very guilty thing about taking credits. Younger generation is very much changing it. But it's
Yeah.
super interesting that you are saying it about Mexico and how people are on one side being really strategic, on the other side trying to also post some status about the money, because this is where I come from. One of the first investitions in Slovakia for young people is to buy a car. That's not really an investment, right?
Yes. Not at all. By the time that it gets out of the agency, it's depreciated for 30%. So yeah, definitely. And in this term, it's funny that you say about credit, because I feel like in Mexico, credit is used a lot,
Mm-hmm.
where people would do it out of necessity most of the time. We also have a lot of entrepreneurs, I have to say. I learned this being in the university in the States, and also talking to my friends that went to university in Mexico, where probably 80% of the whole class or generation would go about and do their own entrepreneurship thing, because people know in Mexico that there are not enough jobs, and there are not enough, or the situation with jobs is hard. Whereas in the States, I was actually learned to be one number more, it's okay, just go, let's go through protocols, let's go through this big companies and how to be just like effective in a big company and things like that. So the perspective of things in different countries is completely different. And talking about credits, I have a lot of friends that actually started with their own businesses, starting with their own entrepreneurship. And I feel like it's really interesting where people would get a lot of credits, let's say, for starting these businesses, or even to maintain like the basic necessities. So in Mexico, credit is something that's used often. And the way we do it is really, I think it's similar to the States, whereas everybody should have credit. Everybody should have a good credit score. I remember growing up, my mom telling me, it's like, whenever you get 18, you're going to get your credit card. Okay. And you need to build up that credit. So whenever you're older, you can have actually a good amount that they can lend you for when you want to buy a house, or when you want to do this, or when you want to do that. So a lot of the things that we're used to think about earning and getting into a position later on, it will be through credit most of the things, or most of the time. It's like, I want a big house, I want to be able to give a stake to my family. Is like, I will work not only to save money, but I will work my credit in order to have a better credit score, so that I can actually use that credit to buy a house, and then started paying it off with 15 to 20 years of my work, you know?
Wow. Okay. That's a very strategic. Is there anything that you would say comparing Mexicans, and let's stay with the financial psychology, because I really love the angle.
Yeah.
Comparing, now you compare them to US, and you are in Austria just 2 months, so I get it. But maybe you can already tell me now, like, what are the differences that you see between you as a Mexican and coming from the culture and Austrian culture in financial psychology?
In terms of like differences, I would definitely say that the stereotype, or one of the stereotypes in Mexico, is that you guys have it all solved over here in Europe. No,
Oh, yeah.
that everything, yeah, that everything is just so perfectly designed. There's no bureaucracy. There's the processes here are just so flawless and things like that. And actually coming here, and the times I've spent here, and I've talked to a couple of friends about like issues and politics and blah, 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 is like, you start to realize that everything in processes and like politics and like infrastructure, it's not as we think it is. And I'm sorry for the French, but it's a bit shitty, to be honest. Everywhere in the world has flaws, and everywhere in the world won't be exactly as we portray it. So in terms of the economical side, I would definitely say that people here in Europe are a lot more relaxed when it comes to money. However, you are really conscient as well, because, of course, your living expenses are pretty high. even though your salaries are well enough, like good enough, you have this norms and rules and support from the government. I've talked to a couple of friends that are already unemployed now, and they feel really chill to just spend a couple of months without work because they know that they have the government to support them. But whereas in Mexico, like I was talking to my friends, and it's like by the time you get laid off or by the time you quit a job, you start using your savings to provide for yourself. There is no help whatsoever from the government. But we have a couple of friends right now that are unemployed. And I feel like the difference of like them being super chill. Some of them told me that they were redecorating their balcony. Some of them are saying that they're going to have a leave for study, do a couple of courses, whether I'm here just thinking, I need to find a job. I would say that in that term, in terms of economical, let's say, stability or like wealth in general, I feel like you guys are a little bit more relaxed, whether as in Mexico, we are still, as I said, in a little bit of a survival mode because we don't have everything figured out. The government doesn't have anything figured out. And that the possibilities of the government actually directly benefiting or giving you something are slim, like really slim. Also, in terms of retirement, is like people know that they should do something for their retirement. However, their current situation might not be the ideal for them to think about retirement because they're not able to figure out more than a couple of months in advance. So in that sense, I will feel like you guys have a little bit more of a chill perspective because let's say there's a support system underneath you.
And this me being Eastern European, where I felt a little kick in my heart because it's different from Western Europe. And when we say Europe, it's usually meant Western Europe, and then it's the Eastern Europe or South Europe. And I know that South Europe is not getting better economically, so people are struggling there as well. But yes, we have the social system. That's where I always say I'm happy to be European because for me, for example, as a worker or now a freelancer, it would be way too tough to be, for example, in the US.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit different on like Western Europe. Yeah, you have this kind of, and now I have it because I live in Western Europe for the last 5 or 6 years where I like, yeah, I can chill because I can look for a job and have time. But to close it up, because we point out very nice things, what would be a recommendation when somebody would be tasked to do a research in Mexico? Maybe not directly in finance, but what would you recommend people to focus and not to focus on?
I would definitely recommend someone to have a guide, definitely. Somebody that can actually explain to you a little bit of the Mexican context. And also, if you are willing, or if anyone is actually thinking about doing research in Latin America, don't feel like researching in Mexico will actually open up the doors for you to every Latin American country because it's
Very good
not.
point.
It's not definitely. Brazil, it's something completely different. Cooks itself like separate to Latin America. I had the fortune to work with really talented people in Colombia and being able to do research in Colombia and in Mexico. I'm able to tell you that the perspective of these two countries, even though they're both in Latin America, are completely different. The way they go about their health system, the way they go about their finances are completely different. So first of all, I would say if you are trying to do a research in Latin America, yes, definitely choose a couple of big countries that you feel like you can, or that you will benefit from that input or those insights, and definitely have somebody that can actually translate the context. And as we've been saying, kind of like reading between the lines, because there are a couple of things that you won't grasp as easily. And at the same time, don't feel like you are just an observer, let's say, in what's going on over there. It's like you can actually put yourself in the situation where you question, why are the things that way? Why is it that the standard? So definitely get into the conversation. We have great agencies back in Latin America that have worked with people in different countries, or even if they haven't, I feel like we're so open to work with so many people. And I really feel like there's a lot of talent in Latin America because we have so many issues and so many things are wrong that it's so interesting just to research there. It's like whether here the complexity comes of like how people feel and how people have preferences over there. I think the complexity goes in terms of infrastructure and what things can users do and they can't, or they're limited in somehow. So I would definitely say get someone that will guide you through the process, that will guide you through the culture. Also, don't just stereotype the whole Latin America with Mexico, because Mexico is completely different to everything else around. We have a lot of influence from the States. So that's why we are like in that middle in between. So just go and talk to a couple of people in different countries. And then I would also recommend probably really being open and curious about the things that are going on, because one thing that can break through and have an impact, it will, let's say that you're doing a research and in terms of a product, particularly you do maybe usability tests and things like that, but don't just focus on that usability part. Don't just focus on like how a feature is going to work or how a label is going to translate in different markets, but like really try to understand the context of the market. And as we said, a little bit more about the mental models of people in the market, because that can probably open up so many opportunities for you. Because as I said, we have so many issues and the countries in Latin America are so complex and so rich at the same time that just by focusing only on a feature, only on the design of one particular service, you're actually not opening yourself to a range of possibilities and opportunities that could actually bring a lot more value to your product. So I would definitely say get a little bit of time, put a little bit of contextual or generative questions in that discussion guide before actually going ahead and doing your usability studies or usability questions or tasks or whatever. I feel like that not will only give you a context of the culture, but it will also give you a lot of opportunities for you to grow the business.
Very good one. Thank you for the point of not putting Latin America. Yeah, there is a continent called Latin America and there is a political area called Latin America, but yeah, it varies. And I totally get you. What do you mean with that? And the second one, yeah, and this is something I am becoming a very big advocate for, that research is political, it's contextual. It has to have this kind of sociology impact or perspective, because yeah, it impacts the products that we want users to use. Where can people follow you or find you?
Definitely. You can find me on LinkedIn, Pamela Escobar. I would love if you have questions, if you want to chat, I have the time to do it. So yes, definitely go ahead and follow me. I'll definitely post this on my LinkedIn so that everybody can actually follow you as well, Tina. I think you're doing an awesome job. I think you're doing great conversations with people, and that we should actually have this kind of conversations. You know, we should actually have this hard questions, difficult things, this wicked problems at the end. I think it's the only way of actually tackling the job that we're doing. It really motivates me. And just by having these hard questions and really understanding the context of people and users is the only way we'll actually have products that are designed for them to serve them and not just serve the business. In a way, we're trying to make the world a better place. And the only way to do it a better place is by designing with the roles and the environment and where we're putting the product in. So really, thank you very much for having this space and having this awesome conversation as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to UXR Geeks. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow our podcast and share it with your friends or colleagues. Your support is really what keeps us going. If you have any tips on fantastic speakers from across the globe, feedback, or any questions, we'd love to hear from you too. Reach out to geekspodcast@uxtweek.com. Thanks for tuning in.